Hello, my darlings. Mother Raven here with another wonderful tale to tell you. This is another one by Tainted Tales, written by Chris Davies, and it is entitled The Haunting Well. Stiles, Texas, August. The woman stood on her timber porch and watched the escarpment light up. The rugged mountain tops caught the rays of the declining sun. She smiled at the orange haze cast above the horizon. The sky was set aglow as if lit by fire, yet the haze was so crisp and clear. The old paint was mostly chipped. The building was now a ragged wreck of a joint. But it was home, and that's what counts. Emily Joseph Ross had suffered countless times in her life. She sat with her daughter Madison around the old oak table. Emily had a grim talent for the paranormal. Over the years, it had become a living curse. An upturned whiskey tumbler lay still on the Ouija board. Black and white checkered tiles spread across the floor as an old kettle broke into a scream. On top of the blue-gray formica, Emily made 2 cups of coffee. She carried them back and said, "Shall we begin now?" The chanting started. She looked to her daughter in her own gaze and spoke somberly. "Take a deep breath and relax." Emily coaxed her daughter along with the verse of protection. They held clammy hands. Excitement and fear. It's a heady mix, is it not? Said Emily. She placed the tumbler on the letter G, then told her daughter they should rotate the glass a few times. Warm the old board up some. "It's been a while," Emily said. "Now you need to concentrate, baby. Dear Spirit, as I light these candles, bless this sacred place. Let the light of their flames radiate love and protection to all 4 corners of this room. I ask at this time that any negative energies be released from this space. With a bath of white light, I ask that it be cleansed and neutralized. Turn my dwelling into a sanctuary. May it be the foundation for your teachings and the inspiration for my higher perceptions." Emily spoke. "Madison, honey, light up the candles and the incense." They sat face to face, placing the board across their laps. Emily said, smiling, touching her daughter's hand, "You ready, darling?" The girl nodded, but seemed a bit anxious. The only other noise to be heard was the whirring of the wind, and the dust whispered against the old door. "Can we have a spirit on the board? Can you hear me? Will you come and talk to us?" Nothing. Emily took a sip of her awful coffee, screwed up her face, squinting disdainfully at the mug as if it had wronged her dreadfully. "I declare I can only ask. I can't make 'em come none." She raised her hand, exasperated. The candles flickered. The room became chilly. She felt an uneasy presence in the house. The bare bulb in the hall popped, and wooden doors slammed shut, nearly taken off the hinges. Emily shuddered, but tried to remain calm. "Talk to me. We want to hear your story." She would later regret being so free with the afterlife. They'd lived just on the edge of Stiles. It was a ghost town. It had been that way since so long as Emily could recall. In years past, people just packed up when they missed out on the railroad and the oil. Back in the early 1900s, there was a series of killings. And now the place is said to be haunted. The woman spoke again, more assertively. "Can we have a spirit on the board?" Madison had done a few of these Ouija sessions before. The girl started doodling on the pad she had to keep notes. Emily said, "Patience, honey. It's not like calling Jolene down the road, you know." The teenager smiled and said, I know. The woman spoke. "While longer, and we'll pack it up." Madison suddenly looked at her mother's wide eyes. "You feel that, Ma?" "I sure did." The glass twitched and edged its way to the location yes on the board. Emily politely said, "Thank you for joining us." Then she asked, "Are you a good spirit?" Madison was ready with her notebook. The answer dictated if they would go on or not, or say goodbye on the board. The tips of their fingers moved the glass, were guided to the next answer it moved to. Yes. They sighed out loud, but then it started on the move again to the corner saying, "No." They edgily looked at each other. Emily said, to diffuse the nerves of Madison, "I guess everyone has done a little bad, right?" The tumbler moved again to the yes. The girl says, "Shall we end this session?" Out loud talking to Emily, but the spirit answered anyway, going to no. They grounded the glass, putting it on the letter G. Emily said, "What's your name?" Things were getting tense now. The glass started to move at a snail's pace towards the first letter, which was C. Madison wrote it down. Her mother said, "I'll just keep shouting the letters. You make sure you don't miss nothing." Emily says, "I think we're going to live here tonight." Emily said, "I think we got a live one here tonight." It went on like that for a while. The spirit spelled out Clementine. The pair echoed, "Such a beautiful name." They ground the glass on the J again before asking another question. The next question Madison asked, "What is your surname?" The glass crawled over to the letter S and continued to spell out the surname. "Sands," Emily gasped. Her eyes looked like a deer in the headlights. Madison said, "What's wrong? Do you recognize the name?" "I do indeed. It's a dark tale in these parts." The mother and daughter sat in ominous silence. Emily said, quivering, "I think we should close the board down." The girl nodded. "Then you'll tell me of this urban legend?" The mother snapped at her. "It is no urban legend. The story of Clementine Sands is real, all right." The young girl seemed intrigued. "I'm sorry. I'll take it seriously. Do you hear that? Do you hear?" Came back at her. The woman decided to take a break and come back to it later. "In the meanwhile, I'll tell you that story." They thanked the spirit for an interesting session and said goodbye. The glass glided to goodbye on the board. They said the invocation for closing and thought nothing of it. "Dear spirit, thank you for sharing this sacred time with me. I appreciate the flow of energy I have just experienced. I will use it for my highest good. As I blow out these candles, I close this sacred space and ask that your protection surround me wherever I go today." Emily and her daughter went outside for a smoke, where she proceeded to tell Madison the story. They both sat on some old stonework, and Emily began. She pointed at a ruin of a building. "You see that building yonder?" Madison said, "Yeah, I seen it." The woman said, "That was once the courthouse, back when Styles was prosperous." The girl said, "Okay. Well, that's where they hung him." Madison screwed up her face. Emily remarked, "Her lover, Eugene Weeks, a violent man. Eugene Weeks had a bad reputation back then. A bad man and dangerous to know. Kind of a deal hung over him. Not that he didn't revel in the naming. He liked the notoriety. He was a man of low character, so the judge told him at the trial." The entire jury agreed, but that was not the full story, it turns out. Emily said, "You see that tree?" Madison said, "Which one? There are plenty." "The crooked devil-looking tree that has that big out-swinging branch." The girl said, "Creepy looking, ain't it?" The woman said, "You see the gnarled and marred markings on that big overhand?" The girl says, "Uh-huh." "Well, that's where they swung him from." The branch creaked in the breeze to the symphony of crickets. Madison said, "And is that the story?" Emily shook her head and sighed. "Far from, far from." She took a drag on her smoke that had just gotten to half an inch of ash. She flicked the cigarette away into the dust, hugging her daughter and resuming Clementine Sand's story. She spoke in a nostalgic way, almost dewy-teared. Look at me. It's just my ma used to tell me this story. Her mother had passed from cancer the year before, and that's why they had this house out in the middle of nowhere. She put her head on her hand. Where was I, honey? I'll forget my head sometime. The girl said they'd just hung that man named Jane. Emily coughed. The dust had kicked up a bit. I'll tell you from the start. She kept looking at the old stone well covered in desert brush. The well seemed to distract her. Why are you looking at the water well funny? Said Madison. It's just memories, I guess. Evenings felt so close and atmospheric in Texas, from the sweet smell of jasmine to the diesel in the nostalgic air. The woman said, the thing is, even with the man's last kicks as he dangled, there was a feel something was amiss. He'd always spoke of his innocence, and it was another. The man was cut down and nothing was said, except the murmurs behind closed doors. Very little was known of Clementine Sands, except she was from a big city in the West. She apparently was used to the finer lifestyle, but times had turned hard on her. That's when, it seems, Eugene Weeks had got his hooks in her. Clementine was at a low point and vulnerable, and agreed to come to Texas to start afresh. But things hadn't panned out the way she imagined, and she became a restless soul. She was a beautiful woman, tall, slender, a huge smile, big brown eyes like suns, dark flowing locks, and all the curves a woman needs to draw admirers. But that was her exterior. Her inner depths was somewhat different. Troubled would be the right word. Everyone knew Eugene beat her when he was drunk, which was more regular than not. And then there was the gossip. People said they had seen her in the shadows at night. People spoke of her being in a clandestine affair with a mystery man. Who could blame her, a woman in a predicament such as hers, tied into a loveless relationship with a lout of a man? Back then, though, it was still frowned upon, so the rumors went on. Then there were 2 young kids. What would become of them? It seemed such a mess, and no way out, but that all changed. Clementine hatched a plan. She would tell the Chancellor she was meeting an ultimatum. She hoped her beauty would win him over. It worked in the past, in the dance halls in the big cities. Emily said, this is what happened. I'm just going to have a ciggy first. Madison says, be quick. This is how Ma used to tell me the story. She took a deep breath and exhaled, her lips pursed. The woman said, suppose over the years people have changed it a bit, but I don't think you should trifle with people's life stories. Madison nodded. The girl brushed her flaxen hair off her forehead and smiled. Clementine lay cocooned in fine bedding. She gazed out the window past the old shutter onto the veranda. A lance of light broke the dawn sky in such fiery colors, reds, oranges, and bloody pink. She lay next to her lover, who rolled over and studied the naked woman before walking onto the veranda, trailing sheets from whence he came. It was then Clementine asked him to marry her. He did not look at her. He just kept looking at his jasmine garden down below. Madison said, what was his reply? Flicking her wavy hair around, Emily says, you just listen, hun. The answer he gave that day, so the story says, is, I'm not marrying a woman with child, and that's final. She patted her head in the feather-down pillows, sobbing. She was used to getting her own way with men. Not this time. This time she had to get dressed and leave. What else could she do? It seemed her chance of happiness and nice things had gone. Back to the dour life and the torrent of abuse from Eugene Weeks. This filled her with a dread. The forlornness of it all was too much. But a woman spurned is a ferocious and volatile creature. And this is when the tale turns dark. Now, in a desolate state of mind, and with no one to console her, her diabolical deed was done. Her lover had said he would not have a woman with child. That much is true. Clementine sat in an old mahogany rocking chair she had brought with her from Carson City. What crazy thoughts ran through her head no one knows, but the things she did that night were sinister to the very essence of the devil. Emily and Madison sat on the old stonework, contemplating in silence. Tumbleweeds rolled on by as a breeze picked up. They rubbed their goosebumps. Madison popped back in the house. I'm going to get a blanket and a drink from the refrigerator. Get me a cold one while you're in there, said Emily. The girl came back with a blanket they used as a big shawl. Emily clinked her bottle of Bud against Madison's and said, Here's looking at you, baby doll. Clementine must have been deranged. Only a deranged woman would do such a deed. But that night, while her children were sleeping, she bound and gagged them. There was an old stone well outside their shack. Folk called it a wishing well. Well, as the little darlings slept, she carried them one by one and dropped them into the cavernous depths below. Although distraught, it did not deter her from going to her lover's house once again. She crept around in the shadows like a creature of the night. She arrived, her nightdress bedraggled in water, an emotional wreck. She blurted out to her man, I am no longer with children. The man assumed she'd meant that she'd left Eugene and left the kids behind. Clementine went on to say what she'd done. She thought he would take her back in a twisted sort of logic. The man raged, claiming her disturbed and an insidious woman. What malevolence is this you come knocking on my door with? Leave now. I once loved you, so I'll not say anything. Now, a few different versions of how this story ends exists. One is she's roaming the streets back home in a comatose state, back to the well, climbing down on a rope searching for her kids, and her mournful cries can still be heard. There are people who say she hung herself in the well. Another says it was the lover who hung her. Either way, Eugene got the blame. You may wonder who the mystery man was. Years later, on his deathbed, the judge admitted it was him she'd been seeing. Emily stroked Madison's cheek. That's right, darling. More in heaven and earth than we'll ever know. She spoke in a somber tone. Folk round these parts say they hear her in the dark hours. Madison said, Really? Uh-huh. The boys from the Exxon plant say they saw her one time not far from here. They both looked at the well. Madison now understood. They say she's still searching for those kids, Emily spoke, on a desolate highway or in a small town, or more likely or not, our own doorstep. The girl's eyes drew wide. I want to go inside now, Ma. Now you know who Clementine Sands is. Back in the kitchen, they spoke a while about Clementine's story and the Ouija board experience they had had earlier. The board lay dormant, but it was drawing them in, teasing them. Should they use it? Should they not? Emily wanted Madison to be a bit more reticent, but they both, however, wanted to know more. So after some talk, they decided they would use the board once again. The women placed the Ouija board on their laps. They took the tumbler and did a few circles with it, then spoke a few verses of protection as they had done earlier that evening. Emily bunched up her auburn hair and said, Shall we begin? Madison just nodded. So Emily took the lead again and said, Can we have Clementine Sands on the board? Can you hear me? Will you come and talk to us? Surprisingly, they did not have long to wait this time. The glass moved to yes. The women placed the Ouija board on their laps. They took the tumbler and did a few circles with it and spoke a few verses of protection, as they had done earlier that evening. Emily bunched up her auburn hair and said, Shall we begin? Madison just nodded, so Emily took the lead again and said, "Can we have Clementine Sands on the board? Can you hear me? Will you come and talk to us?" Surprisingly, they did not have long to wait this time. The glass moved to yes. Emily centered the tumbler. "Is this Clementine Sands we're talking to?" Their fingers on top of the tumbler were guided to yes. Both women thanked the spirit for joining them. They centered the tumbler on G, and Madison asked a question. "Why did you kill your children?" Emily looked at her. "You sure you want to ask a spirit of things like that?" The glass hovered over the I and went on to spell, "I was in love." They put the glass back on G, and Madison asked something else. The girl inquisitively said, "Are you at peace, Clementine?" The makeshift planchette slipped across the board to no, although the women did notice it stopped to zigzag and stuttered agitatedly. Emily put her hand to her mouth briefly, and Madison fidgeted with her flaxen hair. Madison ground the glass on G and asked, "Is there something you want here?" The glass, more authoritatively, went straight to yes. They put the glass back on G, but the glass slipped out of the board when Madison sneezed. Shards of glass exploded across the room. Madison got a dustpan and brushed and swept up, shaking her head, making a frustrating tut-tutting sound. She reached into the cupboard and got another old glass. It was chipped, and she cut her finger. Blood dripped on the glass, and a trickle went on the board. Madison said, "Does this mean we're cursed or have made some kind of pact?" Emily smiled. "The only cursing you'll get is if you mess up my floor some more." "Where do you kids get these ideas?" The girl said. "I seen it on the Late Show this one time." Emily mused. "Heck no, you ain't getting no curse. Get out of here and get the Ouija session done." She spoke sternly, but her mouth broke into a grin. The two women paused, figuring out where they were up to. Madison had the note, so they found out quickly. Bright-eyed Emily said, "I have a suggestion." She reached in her leather-tasseled handbag. "Look what I got me. It's an old dictaphone." Madison queried why this was a relevant idea. The woman spoke. "Get with it, girl. You can record a spirit's voice if the spirit is a strong-minded one." Madison said, "Yeah, right. You were on that hippie trail way too long, Ma." Emily explained, "What we are going to do is ask Clementine to talk into this. I believe you'll only hear it on playback." They thought of some questions and decided what they would ask Emily. Emily said, "Clementine, will you talk into this machine?" Pointed a spindly finger at it, tapping it with her long nails. A shooting glass smeared with Madison's blood was the new planchette. It made its way to yes. Madison wanted to ask the first question. She said, "Clementine, you say you're not at peace. What are you looking for?" The whirring of the machine stopped with a click. "Play it." They listened in anticipation. The machine whirred again. "I am looking for my children." Clear as a bell, they could hear Clementine's voice. Madison had another question. The kitchen had gotten chilly all of a sudden. Madison said, "You killed your children, Clementine." The shooting glass started counting down 9 to 0, freaking them out. Emily snatched the glass, grounding it on G. "I don't think she likes your line of questioning, honey." They listened to see if anything had been recorded on the tape. "I know I did. Now I am after any children." This horrified the women. Emily had just the one question. "Are you coming for my girl?" Madison looked petrified. The place went deadly silent, and the lights faded to dead. The glass started doing manic figure eights faster and faster. There was a boom. The board crashed up in the air. A voice said,
"I want your girl."
It spoke with such a creaky malevolence and with such ferocity. The girls ran for the doors. Madison tripped and was crawling on her hands and knees. Emily was near the open door when it slammed harshly in her face. Then, what sounded like the clatter of hooves prancing at the door smashed their way in. Emily pummeled the door in a panic-like frenzy. The last she saw was her daughter being dragged out the back by some kind of entity. A sepia spirit dressed in a tattered white gown with long dark hair flailing. Her face was chalky. She looked in her eyes. They were black, dead pools. The god-awful screams of the girl ripped the night apart. Madison's nails clawed raggedly in desperation at the carpet, ripping her nails off. One of the last things Emily heard before her life was snuffed was the mournful cries that people spoke of. And then she heard the splash echo from the old well. Then nothing, just desolate peace. The town is left forsaken again. Lest we forget, be careful what you mess with. It's not a game. The old house in Styles has been set alight twice now. Police say it's an arsonist, but I don't know. I think perhaps it may be someone else's work. Through me, you go into a city of weeping. Through me, you go into eternal pain. Through me, you go amongst the lost people. Dante Alighieri. Thank you, my darlings. I know this is a very long one, my longest one yet. I hope you enjoyed it. I relied on Reba episodes for the accent. I was afraid it would slip into my dear friend's Oklahoma accent. Oddly enough, when it did slip, it went more British, but I hope it wasn't too painful to the ears. Thank you, Chris Davies, for this story. I hope you all enjoyed it. So quoth this raven, and I will see you again next time, my darlings, under the trees.